Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. Today, I'm with Jamal Jones. Jamal is a licensed marriage and family therapist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. In his clinical practice, he specializes in marriage counseling, therapy for men, and people of color. Jamal, thank you for being here.
You're welcome, Marissa. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. So let's start, Jamal, with the typical 2 questions of this podcast. I'm curious, how do you define codependency?
One simple way is people pleasing, living a life, having a mindset, and adopting a series of behavioral patterns where your focus is to meet others' needs, to please other people, and through that, through pleasing other people and meeting their needs and enabling unhealthy behaviors, whether it be alcohol or being abused or being taken advantage of, enabling that person by not being able to say no or set healthy boundaries. And it gets really unhealthy when a codependent, their self-worth, their value, their self-esteem comes from those behaviors.
Right. Right. So to put it simply, people pleasing.
People pleasing at a great personal cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what have you observed in your clients? What are some of the costs?
Low self-esteem, low feelings of self-worth, a lack of confidence, difficulty making adult decisions on their own without having the approval of someone else. One example could be, say, a recent college or a recent high school or college graduate is transitioning into adult life.
Right.
But they still crave the approval of their caregiver, whether it's a biological parent, a single parent, a grandparent, or another example could be someone in a romantic relationship. What do you want to eat? And that person really wants Mexican food tonight. They've been craving Mexican food for a week or so. It's top of their mind, but they're so vested in pleasing the person that they're in a relationship with, they'll dismiss that craving that they have for that Mexican food. And they really don't like Italian food all that much.
Right.
But because they want to please that person in a relationship, oh, well, I don't know what I want. What do you want? I think I want okay, let's go get Italian food.
Right.
And that becomes a pattern in a relationship where you have either one or both people who are not really acknowledging or taking ownership of what their real needs are.
Right.
That are legitimate needs.
Mm-hmm.
So that person's not showing up as their authentic self in that relationship.
Right.
They're showing up as who they think they need to be for somebody else.
Right. And with these two examples, Jamal, right, I sense that codependency is saying, oh, I don't know, what do you want? Yeah, let's get Italian, right? As simple as that, but it can generalize into, I don't know what I want to do with my life. What do you think, mom or dad? Oh, you want me to be a doctor? Sure, I'll be a doctor, right? When really, I want to be an artist, or I don't know, travel agent, or I don't know,
And
barista.
it's not unusual for adults to come to therapy or participate in counseling. And a lot of the work in the counseling process is that individual discovering who they are. What are their values?
Right.
What do they believe? Are their career choices, relationship choices, other life choices in alignment with their values and beliefs? Or have they gone their entire childhood, adolescent, and the majority of their adult life? For the sake of this conversation, let's put them in their, let's say they're 35 years old. They're 35 years old and they're still wanting the approval of certain people in their support system.
Right.
Now they're in counseling and they're hopeless, they're sad, in some cases depressed, they're lacking confidence, and they're anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are genuinely afraid to decide to marry somebody, or to decide what college to go to decide what job to take, or to change careers.
Right.
Part of the maturing process is getting to that healthy place of understanding the needs and wants and the expectations of those around you. But as an adult, after taking all that into consideration, still having the understanding and the confidence in knowing that this is your life, it is your decision, it's your responsibility, right. And you have to own it and show up for yourself. And I've heard somebody put it this way recently that I love the way he says this. He says, show up for your life. Because if you don't show up for your life, no one else will. Mm-hmm. And being a codependent is, in essence, showing up for others' lives.
Right. Right. So Jamal, do you have any codependent experience or relationship from your own life that you can share with us?
Yes. I am 41 years old, and this is my 4th year in private practice. This is my second profession. I have a background in ministry. For those of you who are familiar with the Enneagram, I am an Enneagram type 2. And so I am very heart-centered, the youngest of 5 kids, and I am a people pleaser. As a licensed marriage therapist, I am a professional people pleaser. So many of these lessons about self-awareness and self-care and having healthy boundaries and taking responsibility for your life, I've had to go on my own personal journey, and I'm still, really, it's a never-ending journey. I've gone through hours and hours of my own individual therapy and group therapy, and I've done faith-based recovery programs. Right now, I'm part of a mastermind. I heard about you, Marissa, through a program that you went through prior to me going through that program. And it's well known that in healthcare, whether it's, in our case, mental health care or nursing or being a physician, those of us who are service-oriented, heart-oriented in the hospitality business, we tend to have a codependent background. Mm-hmm. And it is what it is. The key is to become aware of it. And once we're aware of it, we can now bring it from the subconscious to the conscious, and we can now begin to make different choices about how to cope with it and build into our life's different mechanisms to help us manage it better.
Right.
Things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Does a experience come to mind where you became conscious of your subconscious codependent, a pattern behavior relationship?
Yes, I can give different examples. I'll use my professional life as an example. Going back to my first career in ministry, I was a pastor and I was on staff with an organization called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That was my first position out of college. And in essence, when you're part of a parachurch organization like that, or any nonprofit for that matter, one of the requirements is to fundraise. So I was a full-time chaplain for the Fresno State football team where I played, the campus director for FCA at Fresno State, and I would eventually become a regional director for FCA throughout California.
Mm.
And an example is the fundraising aspect. I knew I was walking in what my calling was. I knew that I was in alignment with what I wanted to do. But with the fundraising, when you're a people pleaser or a codependent, you may not be as aware of the exchange of expectations that comes along with receiving a financial gift for the nonprofit.
Right.
So that's an important message for anybody who may be listening to this. You may be an executive director of a nonprofit, or you may be part of an organization where, as part of what you do, you're exchanging or receiving monetary gifts for different causes. And the world is full of wonderful people who give generously and without any expectations tied. However, there are times when people invest or they give money, they do have expectations. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was one of my challenges when I was in that season of life, was knowing my job and my responsibilities and like who pays my bills, like who writes my check. But then at the same time, I got all this donor base who is also contributing. And so it could really turn into like a power struggle. Mm-hmm. And as a people pleaser, you can get the short end of the stick a lot of times.
Right.
And so that's one example.
What did that look like? What was your short end of the stick?
So kind of along the same lines, I was charged with the task of reestablishing the local advisory board for FCA. So when I came to Fresno State and as a student athlete playing football, that's how I got introduced to FCA. Mm. And at that time, it had a advisory board in place. It was relatively healthy. But over a period of years, it kind of dwindled. So, which is not unusual in many nonprofits because the staff are just so swamped and overwhelmed with different tasks and responsibilities. And not everybody looks forward to board meetings, depending on the makeup of the board and the personality of the person. And so there's all kinds of factors as to why the board kind of died down. All that being said, I was still young as a leader, and I didn't fully understand the difference between an advisory board and a governing board. Mm. And so I built this board, or I rebuilt a board. And I was reading, Googling and using the manual from the organization to figure out how do I build a board locally. And in essence, the person that I chose to be the chairman of the board, I empowered that person because I wanted him to know that I loved him. I trusted him. And as a leader, I did not realize that in one sense, I was basically giving that person too much power.
Wow.
Like, yes, he was a chairman, and the nature of being the chairman of the board is a critical position in the ministry. But keep in mind, this is an advisory chairman.
Right.
But I was treating him like he was a governing chairman. And he began to behave that way because if I gave him power, why wouldn't he take it?
Right.
So that's part of the backstory of how I experienced some challenges. And at the same time, I was already in graduate school for my working on my degree in marriage, family, and child therapy.
Wow.
But relationships are so essential to life and nonprofit work. And when relationships go bad, it really impacts the quality of your life.
Right.
And so that was a sign for me that, yes, when I get my degree in marriage family therapy, I want to transition out of ministry and I want to dive into mental health because I want something different. I want a fresh start.
Yeah. Because how did it impact you internally right? You took on like, okay, let me put this board together, and you did it. And then it wasn't an advisory board to you, Jamal. It was a governing board. Like this isn't advice. Like this is the end all be all. Because again, I'm codependent. Like I can't like distinguish like, yeah, like once someone is in like a place of power, like all hail that position. And like, what did that do to you internally?
It literally broke my heart. Over the years, I've had to, it took me years to heal from that.
Wow.
I'm a huge believer in the practice of forgiveness, and I'm a huge believer in, self-care. And I do believe that depending on the damage that's done to a relationship, depending on how traumatic it could be, if trauma is experienced, at the time, this was a very important relationship in my life. Again, even though I was working full time as a pastor on staff with this organization, the nature of ministry is so personal, it's so relational. So he invited me into his life. I invited him into my life. And so there was a huge feeling of betrayal. I want to say there was some anger, because yes, there was some anger, but you and I both know that sometimes underneath anger, there's sadness and there's tears and there's embarrassment. There was part of me that was embarrassed, like, oh my God, what did I do? As a 41-year-old looking back, I would have done things a lot differently. But I know that it was a wonderful learning experience, but I'm just trying to emphasize for you that, yeah, that's an example of me experiencing some major disappointment, heartbreak, resentment, feelings of betrayal, anger, because you feel like somebody that's close to you kind of went behind your back or used their influence, used that trust that they gained inappropriately. And in the context of me being a codependent, right, that's an example of me being a professional. I was in my 20s and I was a pastor during ministry, and I was operating from a place of codependence.
Right. So
as I'm telling this story, even thinking about it, it's part of my healing process, because now I can actually acknowledge that. I can say, that was a season of my life where I was unaware of some of my beliefs. I was unaware of some of my thought patterns. some of my behavioral patterns. At that time, I wasn't aware of how much damage or how I was contributing subconsciously to all that was happening.
Right.
In that moment in real time, of course, I'm, pointing the finger at him and how could he do this? But now I look back and I say, I was younger, I was less experienced, I was less mature, and I allowed certain things to happen.
Right.
I created opportunities for certain things to happen.
Right.
And that's the hard work of being a codependent is, again, we can talk all day about, things that come up. You spend all this energy and this time trying to please somebody, trying to make their life better, which builds your self-worth, your self-confidence. But in the end, that person is going to do what's best for them. So what do you expect?
Right.
They're looking out for them. You're looking out for them. Well, if you don't look out for yourself, who will?
Right. So acknowledging our contribution to the aftermath or the betrayal or the heartbreak. Yeah.
Even if it's 5%, in your mind, if you genuinely believe that the other person is 95% responsible for the conflict or whatever happened, even if you're responsible for 5%, your willingness, your ability and commitment to take an ownership of that 5% is an important part of your healing process.
Right.
And it's an important part of your ability to forgive. Because forgiveness, just a note on that, on forgiveness and codependency, forgiveness is more for the person that's doing the forgiving than the one being forgiven. So forgiveness is foundational for being mentally healthy, because when we don't forgive, what's the alternative? Now we're harboring 5% of sadness, anger, hopelessness, betrayal, mistrust. Now we're harboring all these negative thoughts, moods tied to these thoughts, life experiences, and it really impacts the way we show up. And again, that's why you and I, Marissa, are in this profession. There's plenty of adults who have these struggles, and they often seek you out and myself and our colleagues for help to work through them.
Yeah. Right. Let's talk about defining relationships and setting expectations. Right? Some of your specialties, Jamal. So what does it mean to define a relationship?
A fun and very appropriate example is dating. And let's start with dating, and then it can spin off into other aspects. But we are in contact with people on a regular basis. And let's say that someone is in college, they're at the university, and they're in different classes, and they're on campus, and they're having contact with different people. So in that setting, everybody's college students. They're there to learn, they're there to party, to have fun, go on spring break. And in the midst of that, you obviously meet people, and some you have an attraction to. So initially, the relationship may be defined as we're strangers, we're classmates, you're somebody that I just met on spring break, you're just somebody that I might see walking when I'm driving my route to school. At some point, because of that attraction and one or both people taking initiative and responding, there might be some series of events that leads to, okay, let's redefine this from being a classmate to, I want to get to know you at Starbucks, casually. And by getting to know you at Starbucks, this is defined as it's just a casual interaction. This is not necessarily a date. It's not let's get married. It's just let's meet at Starbucks casually. I met you in college, but now I want to get to know you a little bit more here at Starbucks. Doesn't mean I want to sleep with you. Now, that initial encounter at Starbucks, you know how it is when you first meet somebody. Like, oh, we said we were going to do 1 hour. Oh, we went 90 minutes. Oh, I already got to go to class now. And then it leads to some phone conversations. Oh my goodness, I called him at 11 o'clock. We talked at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh. Oh, now you go to 8 o'clock class and you're like so tired because you were up till 3 o'clock in the morning talking to that person. That relationship is now redefined as it's more than casual. Now there's an attraction happening. Mm-hmm. There's a infatuation happening. Now, keep in mind the subconscious and the conscious. Just because it's happening, that does not mean that either person has communicated that, hey, because I'm now on the phone with you till 3 o'clock in the morning and we're texting throughout the day, I now want to define this relationship as like we're dating. So let's say that we do define it as dating. Okay, this relationship cannot be defined as dating, but is it defined as inclusive dating? Meaning that we had Starbucks, you know, I jive with you, you jive with me, and we're dating, but it's still open. I'm still free to date other people. And you're still free to date other people. So yes, we're dating, but if somebody else is interested in you and you like that person and you move on, it was open-ended, it was inclusive. Nope, it is what it is. Or one of both people could say, well, you know, I want to know that I'm the only person you're dating.
Right.
I want you to date me exclusively. Well, now you can call that a boyfriend-girlfriend type situation. Mm-hmm. And now let's say it progresses where, for sake of this conversation, let's say that one or both people, let's say one person in this relationship desires to get married, but the other person in a relationship has no desire to get married. So one person may have come from a background and have beliefs where like getting married, no way. that is not my end game.
Right.
So we can date exclusively. I'll date you, but if your end game is getting married, I'm not for you. This other person may be of the mindset, I date to get married. So yes, I want to define it as exclusive, but at some point, if things continue to progress, I want to redefine it and get engaged. Mm-hmm. That engagement process, it's an engagement process. There's no promise or guarantee it's going to lead to marriage. And if that one person brings up the engagement, wanting to redefine it that way, that can lead to a lot of conversations between both people. Because now you have one person, oh, I can't understand why he just won't commit to me like more officially with I told her that, you know, she wants to just date and I'm good with that. And then of course, if they choose to, it could move toward defining it as a marriage relationship. So that's how it can progress in romantic relationships. Mm. Keeping in mind in context of codependence, right? And a people pleaser, a codependent may not want to get married, may not want to be engaged, may not want to be exclusive. But because they're codependent and they have an attraction toward this person, it's like, I don't even want to do all of this, but because I'm so vested in you and I want to please you and I want to do what's best for you I'm dismissing what's I think it's best for me. I'm dismissing my values and my beliefs. So now I've been in this relationship for 3 years now. Yes, I like you, and I mean, but I didn't necessarily want to be with you for 3 years. But because of that emotional investment in pleasing you and putting you first, I haven't had the strength or the maturity or the awareness, the boundaries to communicate, you're a good person. It's been great getting to know you, but I think I'm ready to move on to something different.
Right.
I'll stop there.
So what I'm hearing is we can be more intentional about defining relationships, yet commonly codependents allow, rely on, and relinquish relationship definition to the other, right? So I'll be your best friend if you want to be my best friend, or I'll be in a inclusive relationship because you want to stay inclusive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll define us through you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we end up in, again, like you talked about in the beginning, right? The maturing process is understanding the needs of others or preferences of others and our own, and, making decisions based off that awareness of others, but also like what's most aligned for us. And so, yeah, we can just be in a bunch of relationships that we didn't define.
Mm-hmm. And in the professional life, the way it could look is we can work, let's say that we work for a life insurance company, New York Life Insurance. So we work for New York Life Insurance, which is a very established company. It has lots of agents. It has management. It has systems, processes in place. But it's a commission sales position. So when you decide to go into life insurance, that's what you sign up for. You're signing up for, you might get a base salary, but that base salary isn't going to cover your full mortgage or your full cost of living, because it's the position in and of itself is designed for you to sell, to get leads, and to follow up, and to meet with people and talk with them about life insurance, and to build your book of business as a life insurance agent. So some examples of codependency in a professional context could be, how can I help you with your job? How can I support you? How can I help you get more sales? Hey, Marissa, I met somebody, this is my cousin. So, legally, ethically, I can't take him on, but I'm going to refer my entire family to you. Well, would it be appropriate to, if I do that, if I'm operating from a place of healthy relationship, would it be beneficial to at least have a conversation about, hey, Marissa, I got a list of people that, because I don't want to have a dual relationship, and that's another conversation that we have about dual relationships and codependency, but because I want to have a dual relationship with my brother or my sister or my cousin or my grandparent, whoever that person, I got 10 people I can refer to you. Mm-hmm. Oh, great, Jamal. I'll take all 10 of them. And let's say that 6 of those 10 become some of your long-term clients. You just got thousands of dollars in business from me. From a codependent perspective, I never even had the conversation with you about reciprocity. Mm. Hey, Marissa, what would it look like for you and I to have a referral relationship? Right. Where I send some of my family and friends to you, but if you have some family and friends that it's inappropriate for you to take their business, if you know I sent you 6 people, well, why are you sending them to somebody else and not me? Well, in terms of expectations, if we don't discuss it, maybe it was a subconscious expectation, but you never talked to them. We haven't had that conversation.
Right.
So codependency shows up professionally. I'll use myself as an example. Before I came into private practice, I was working full time at the county jail, and it's a setting where it can be a very dark place to work. It's a very high risk place to work. The suicide rate's very high in the jail. It's a dangerous place to work. It's high security, and we were understaffed. So let's say the jail had 20,000 patients in there. As medical staff, we call them patients. And we had 20 staff. And I was the one, because I'm an Enneagram type 2, and I am a professional codependent, and I was operating in terms of being understaffed. And so I would do a lot of overtime. If somebody asked me to cover a crisis for them, I would cover crisis for them. I had a job description I signed up for.
Right.
And the job description I signed up for, I didn't even do because I was doing other people's jobs. Now, that's being a good team player, but I'm just trying to own it in terms for me, under that pressure, under that stress, in that setting, I can look back and say there were some situations where if I was operating from a place of health, I wouldn't have said yes so often.
Right.
I would have been more comfortable taking time off instead of feeling the pressure of, I got to be the work, I got to be there because it's high risk, and these patients, this company's depending on me.
Right.
And that was part of what led me to getting burnt out and eventually let go.
Yeah.
So that's an example of how being codependent, when you're professional, it can cost you your livelihood. Now, for my story, that's how I ended up transitioning into private practice. There's some benefits to being in private practice that I love to enjoy, including the freedom of time, the freedom of how you work with your clients, and there's so many other factors that are out of your control when you're a W-2 employee. But again, that's an example of how, in my personal life, not being aware enough of how I was operating, how I was thinking.
Right.
I was married with a 3-year-old daughter, the breadwinner, licensed professional, and now I was unemployed, a Black male. That was one of the lowest points in my life. In terms of my healing, when I did get let go, I had to ask myself, how did I contribute to getting let go? What could I have done differently to prevent that? And that's where the self-awareness comes from, of like, I was saying yes too much. I wasn't communicating my expectations.
Right. And then going back to this defining relationships, you write these examples in your personal life, right? This example of someone working for New York Life, the example of dating. As codependents, again, like the thread through these examples are our inability, difficulty to define relationships and set expectations internally, right? It's from the external. Whoever I'm dating, you define the relationship. Whoever I'm working with, you define what a good teammate looks like, or what a non-referral relationship looks like. You, Jamal, at work, even technically, the the standards had been set. But for codependence, like we have to add to that, right? It's not 8 hours a day, it's 12. And so, but again, like really this external definition of the relationship and us taking that on.
And in some cases, there's a sense of rescuing others. Some people really thrive and get a great sense of satisfaction when they feel like they're rescuing somebody. Well, before you rescue somebody else on the plane, you got to put on your own mask first. And that's the essence of codependence. Codependents aren't wearing their own mask. They're not doing their self-care.
No. We're sucking on non-oxygen air, trying to give CPR to someone else.
I got you, Marissa. I got you.
Just like gasping for air. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in your work with clients, Jamal, what are some initial steps to discovering our ability to define relationships and set expectations?
One of my all-time favorite books that was transformative in my life, I think it was in my mid-20s. I was in my mid-20s. I was in that season where I was on staff with FCA, and I was having my own struggles. And I went to a therapy session, and the therapist was talking about self-awareness. And so then I had that one session with him, and I went to Barnes. It was either Barnes and Nobles or Borders bookstore, one of those bookstores. And I picked up a copy of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And for me, that book was a game changer, because in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, he outlines these 7 steps of personal development, personal growth. And the first step, I want to say, is be proactive. And he kind of has a diagram where on the bottom part, it's about you're kind of dependent on others, and you want to accomplish independence. And once you accomplish independence, meaning that you're now showing up for yourself, you're being proactive, you can think win-win, like what's best, not only what's best for you, but what's best for me. That's one of the habits, is to think win-win. Like, what's best for you? Okay, that's best for you. Well, okay, here's what's best for me. Now together as a team, this is best for us.
Right.
Taking both sides of consideration. Once a person on an individual level learns to be proactive about their values, proactive about their beliefs, their relationships, their career choices, life choices, whatever is important to them, and they learn to think win-win, and they begin to operate in a healthy place of independence, now you can now choose to become what's called interdependent.
Right.
Where now you're being a team player, and you're practicing teamwork and you're collaborating. But it's so important to get to that place of self-awareness and thinking in a healthy way and having healthy habits. And then once you can show up for yourself consistently, on a regular basis, show up for yourself first. And then you can start thinking about how can you show up for others while still maintaining your self-care.
Right.
So I spend a lot of time in my practice working with people with their self-care plans. Many of my clients are high functioning, motivated people who are established in their careers. I even have some, young clients who aren't established in their careers, but they're just motivated and They're ready to engage in the therapy process. But all my clients, even in my marriage counseling, a big part of my marriage counseling, even though I'm working with the couple in a conjoint session, I meet with them separately to discuss their self-care action plans. Because a lot of times people just aren't practicing self-care, whether it's on the individual level or as an individual as part of a couple. Mm-hmm. So a big part of my practice is self-care. And again, I've come to understand and appreciate how self-care is foundational for mental health. Self-care is foundational for being a healthy human being in the world. Self-care is foundational for showing up as your authentic self, because I've experienced my own pain and my own struggles as an Enneagram Type 2, as the youngest of 5, who grew up in a faith-based environment and who's very service-oriented, heart-oriented.
Right.
And so I am my most important client as a therapist. And that's the key to me being effective and working with whoever I work with. If I'm not healthy, how can I promote or encourage somebody else to be?
Mm-hmm. I love that.
So I do build a collaborative relationship with my clients, and I'm not there for them to give me therapy, but I do want them to know that I'm human and that we're in this together. And even though I'm operating my scope of practice as a licensed marriage and family therapist, there's some humility that comes along with that. And there's times when it's healthy to disclose certain information to the clients so that there's a bond and there's trust and a healthy relationship that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm hearing Stephen Covey was instrumental, his book was instrumental in helping you be proactive, start to define relationships internally as opposed to externally. Mm-hmm. And yeah, his work really does. I remember, for the listener, there's a great story. I believe it's how he opens the book, where him and his wife were fixated on their son and him doing well. And they were like, and really, like, they were codependent, and his success was their success and his failure was their failure. And all of a sudden they were like, oh, we're just going to let him be. And then they're like, oh, look at us. We're all so happy. Not happily ever after, but yeah, I do remember that. And so, yeah, learning about, like, through his work, reflecting on how you went from one extreme, dependent, to experiencing independence in certain aspects, and then really being able to find the balance, the middle ground, the win-win, right? Interdependence, right? How to be a team player. And as you were speaking, I think codependence, we often operate from being a player and just having coaches, right? There isn't a true balance. And also, we don't want the authority of being a coach. So becoming a team player. And I'm hearing with your clients, they're able to define relationships as a consequence or related to the self-care action plan you create with them.
Yeah, so one of the main areas of focus for my clients is to help them clarify their values. Like, at the end of the day, what's important to you? What do you care about the most? Who do you care about the most? Why and why not? And the more clarity a person has on who they are and what they represent, and them knowing that it's an ongoing growth process, it's an evolution. You might be one person today, but you're constantly evolving. And your ability to be aware of change being a process, and your values shift, your values change. Stephen Covey calls it a paradigm shift. A common word that we use today is mindset shift, right? As a human being, you have the freedom to experience all those things. And oftentimes for my clients, I'm helping them become just aware of, I tell them that this is a place where you can let your hair down. You can be yourself. You can speak without any guilt, any shame, any pressure. It's private, it's confidential, so that they can actually get used to thinking about, oh, this is for me. Because otherwise they'll come in there and start talking about how they're trying to save everybody else in their life.
Right.
So as a therapist, I'm defining that relationship with my client. Like, I'm here to support you.
Right.
I'm here to serve you. We're here to help you with your self-care. As part of having a relationship, there's times I'll disclose things that are beneficial for your treatment and for our relationship. But let's be clear, you are not here to give me therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to add value to you, to help you become the healthier version of yourself or the higher version of yourself, so you can show up differently in your life. And when you show up, when you're showing up the way you want to show up, you're done. Before I forget, if you don't mind, Marissa, I want to also recommend Doctors Henry Cloud and James Townsend.
Right.
Doctors Henry Cloud and James Townsend wrote a book. Their first book was called Boundaries. And like Stephen Covey was a bestseller. And since then, they've written other books like Boundaries for Leaders and Boundaries in Marriage. So I'm a huge fan of boundaries, which that's usually a big part of the self-care action plan as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, we'll put links to both those in the show notes. I know I have Boundaries up in my bookshelf. So a client comes in, they're codependent, Jamal. They're no definition to relationship from themselves. And you define the therapeutic relationship. You help them create a self-care action plan. It's flexible, it changes. They get in touch with their values. I'm curious, what does it look like when they are able to, or they do discover that they can define relationships themselves?
Ultimately, they end up feeling empowered. Ultimately, they build courage. During the process, it triggers anxiety because in private, they're talking to me as a therapist in private with the highest level of confidentiality. So it's like outside of this individual session, they're operating codependent, and this is their secret. But as you know, Marissa, the power of therapy is that it provides a holding space where you can have your secrets, you can have your trauma, you can have your hurts, your habits, your hangups. You can have the parts of you can embrace the parts of yourselves that you're not proud of publicly. But what ends up happening eventually is that it slowly spills out into other parts of that person's life.
Right.
And that's where transformation happens, where that person shows up for their therapy session on a regular basis. They're doing the work between sessions. And it's beautiful to see. It's beautiful to see somebody come in, people pleasing, codependent, lacking confidence, being abused in some cases, taken advantage of in so many ways. And then to see them kind of evolve into this person where they know their values and they have their boundaries and they know that they can shift their boundaries and they know that they don't have to voluntarily be in an unhealthy relationship if they don't want to be. They had the freedom to change careers if that's what they want to do. They can advocate for themselves and speak up for themselves. And if they're unhappy with how somebody's treating them, they can move on from that relationship. It's fun. It's a privilege and an honor to be anybody's therapist.
Mm-hmm. Right, a redefinition process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is transformative. When a person's ready and they're motivated, and I probably should take my comment back about anybody's therapist, because not every client therapist is the best fit. So when I do my consultations with clients, I let them know up front whether it's and that's why we do the free consultations, is we let them know that the reason why we're doing this is to discuss expectations,
right,
to answer any questions you might have about the therapy process. But also we want to determine if this is the best client therapist fit or couple therapist fit. If it's not, that's okay. Here's referrals.
Yeah. And
these are thought through. It's not just sending people off. It's like, no, this is what you need based upon your needs. Here's who's in my network, and you could hopefully find a better fit there. If you can't, come back and let me know, and I can give you some more referrals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that fit, not only in the client therapist, but even in dating, right? When you're dating somebody, or when you're considering a job or a career, or a first house or a pair of shoes, I become a huge fan of the fit. Not everything or everybody's is the right fit or the best fit. Not perfection. That's another conversation. We're not looking for perfection. We're just looking for the best possible fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jamal, for coming on. I'm curious if people want to reach out to you or hear more about your services, where can they find you?
You can find me at Central Valley Christian Counsel.com. And counsel is spelled Counsel. I live in the Central Valley. I'm based out of Fresno, California. My email is Jamal@CentralValleyChristianCounsel.com. My office number is 559-242-9319. And even if it's not therapy, if somebody just have some questions, maybe they hear this podcast and they have some follow-up questions. I genuinely love to help and serve people. Even if they need help finding a therapist, I can help them find a therapist. So thank you for having me today, Marissa. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So I'll put links to all of that in the show notes. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week. Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy, and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please